She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't even look guilty. She just slid a piece of paper across the kitchen table like she was handing me a grocery list. And she said, "These are your options. You have until tomorrow morning." I was 16 years old. It was November. It was raining so hard outside that the windows were fogged, and my stepmother had just handed me a list of places I could go. Because I was no longer welcome in the house I had lived in since I was 8 years old. I looked down at that paper. 3 options: a distant relative in another state, a group home 2 towns over, or figure it out on my own. I looked up at my dad. He was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. He said absolutely nothing, not one single word. And that silence, that 5-second silence from the man who was supposed to be my father, broke something in me that took years to repair. I picked up my backpack. I walked upstairs. I packed one bag. I walked out the front door, and I didn't look back. Now, before you keep watching, I need to tell you something important. This story does not end in that driveway. This story does not end in a group home. This story does not end with me broken. This story ends in a boardroom. This story ends with my stepmother sitting across a conference table from me, nervous, composed, needing something that only I could give her: a job. She was applying for a job at my company, and I want to walk you through every single moment between that rainy November night and that interview. Every step, every failure, every decision, every breakthrough. Because if anyone has ever told you that you were too much, that you didn't belong, that you were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved, this story is for you. Stay with me. My mother died when I was 7, breast cancer. It moved fast. One summer she was making pancakes on Sunday mornings and singing off-key to the radio. By fall she was gone. I don't say that lightly. I don't say it for sympathy. I say it because it is the foundation of everything that came after. When your mother dies at 7 years old, you become an expert at adaptation. You become fluent in reading rooms. You learn how to sense when the air has shifted. You learn how to make yourself smaller, quieter, easier, less of a burden. You become the kind of child that adults describe as mature for her age. What they really mean is that grief made you grow up before you were ready. My dad fell apart after she died. Not visibly. He went to work, he made dinners, he showed up to parent-teacher conferences. But there was a piece of him that went somewhere I couldn't follow. He looked through me sometimes. Not at me, through me. Like I was a window and he was searching for something outside. 2 years later, he met Diane. She was beautiful, confidence. She had this energy that filled every room she walked into. And my dad came back to life. I saw it happen. I watched the light come back into his eyes. And I was genuinely happy for him. I was 9 years old, and I was genuinely, truly happy that my dad was smiling again. I tried so hard to make Diane love me. I set the table without being asked. I kept my room spotless. I complimented her cooking. I shared my friends with her daughter Melissa when she visited on weekends. I said please and thank you until the words felt automatic. And for a while, it worked. Not perfectly, but well enough. We were a functional family, quiet sometimes, complicated always, but functional. Everything changed when Diane's daughter Melissa moved in permanently. I was 12, Melissa was 13, and within 3 months, I understood exactly where I stood in this household. Melissa was loud where I was quiet, demanding where I was accommodating. She wanted a bigger bedroom. She got it. She wanted a later curfew. She got it. She wanted Diane to stop working weekends so she could drive her to the mall. Diane stopped working weekends. I watched every single one of these decisions get made. I watched how quickly Diane moved to fix whatever Melissa wanted, and I watched how long my dad took to notice anything I needed, which was usually never. I don't want to make this sound like a dramatic competition between 2 teenagers. It wasn't. It was quieter than that. It was a slow erasure. It was the family photos that started getting taken without me in them. It was the vacation planned around Melissa's dance recital that I found out about through a text message 2 days before they left. It was Christmas where Melissa got a laptop and I got a gift card that expired before I used it. It was the way Diane spoke about Melissa to her friends on the phone. Proud, specific, detailed. And the way she spoke about me. She's adjusting. She's a bit of a loner. You know how it is with that age. I heard every word. I was in the next room every single time. By the time I was 14, I had stopped expecting warmth from Diane. I had filed her under neutral. Like a teacher who doesn't particularly like you but treats you professionally. I could work with neutral. What I was not prepared for was what came next. I was 16 when it happened. It was a Tuesday in November. Nothing special. No big fight. No incident at school. No argument at dinner. Just a regular Tuesday. I came home from school, dropped my backpack by the door the way I always did, and Diane was at the kitchen table. Not cooking, not on her phone, just sitting, hands folded on the table, completely still. I knew something was wrong immediately. My body knew before my brain caught up. My stomach dropped. I said, "Hey." She said, "Sit down." I sat. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I waited. She said, "This house is not working the way it needs to." I waited. She said, "Melissa needs stability. She needs to feel like this is her home." I said, "Okay." She said, "Your presence creates tension." I felt the words land in my chest like stones. I said, "What do you mean, my presence?" She said, "You have energy, a resistance. It affects the whole house." I looked around the kitchen. My backpack was by the door. There was a pot on the stove. The clock on the microwave said 4:47 p.m. I was sitting at a kitchen table being told that my existence was a problem. Then she slid the paper across. 3 options. A relative in another state I had met twice, a group home, or figure it out. She said, "You have until tomorrow morning. Whatever you decide is fine, but this situation isn't working anymore." I looked at my dad. He was in the doorway. He had been standing there the whole time, and he was looking at the floor. I waited for him. I gave him every second I could. I stared at him so hard that my vision blurred. He never looked up. He chose the floor over me. And that was the moment I understood something I had been refusing to understand for years. I was not his priority. I had never been his priority. Not since the day Diane walked in and gave him his smile back. I stood up. I picked up my backpack. I walked upstairs. I packed everything I could fit into one duffel bag. My clothes, a photo of my mom, my journal, my laptop, $43 from the envelope in my desk drawer. I walked back downstairs. Diane was still at the table. My dad had moved to the couch. He was watching television. The television was on. I walked out the front door. Neither of them said a word. Not goodbye, not be safe. No, I'm sorry. Nothing. The door closed behind me. The rain hit me immediately, and I stood in that driveway for about 10 seconds, soaking wet, 16 years old, with $43 in one bag, and I made myself a promise. I said out loud, to nobody, to the rain, to the universe, "This is the last time anyone will do this to me." My friend Kayla let me sleep on her couch. Her mom, Ms. Patterson, was a nurse who worked night shifts and didn't ask many questions. She just made me a plate every evening and said 3 words, "You're okay here." I cried myself to sleep for 2 weeks straight over those 3 words, because they were the most love I had felt in years. I won't rush past this part. I know a lot of these stories skip straight to success, the montage, the upgrade, the revenge glow-up. But that skipping is a lie, and I think it hurts people. It makes survival look easy when it is the hardest thing a person can do. The truth is, I was terrified every single day. I was 16 in a strange house trying to finish high school while figuring out how not to become a statistic. I aged out of Kayla's couch after 2 months. Miss Patterson was kind, but she had her own life, her own bills, her own children. I found a room to rent above a laundromat on the east side of town. $280 a month. No kitchen access. Shared bathroom in the hallway. A window that looked out onto an alley. I worked at a grocery store after school. 4 evenings a week, closing shift. I worked at a coffee shop on Saturday and Sunday mornings. I ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches. I did my homework on my break at the grocery store, sitting in the stockroom on an overturned milk crate. I cried in bathroom stalls a lot, more than I will ever admit to anyone in real life. I missed homework sometimes. I fell asleep in class twice. I called my dad once in December. He answered. He said he was sorry. He said it had been complicated. He said Diane was going through something and he hoped I understood. I said okay. I hung up. I never called him again. I called my mother's sister, my Aunt Renee, once. She lived in another state. She was not on the list Diane had given me. She had not been told what happened. When I told her, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Come here if you need to." I said, "I'm going to try to stay." She said, "Okay, but you call me." Aunt Renee became my lifeline. Not financially, she didn't have much to give, but she called every Sunday morning, every single Sunday, without fail. She reminded me every week that I came from somewhere, that someone remembered me, that someone was paying attention. I don't think she knows how much those calls kept me alive. In the second semester of junior year, I had a counselor named Mrs. Okafor. She was sharp. She noticed things. She called me into her office in February and asked me directly what was going on at home. I told her the truth, all of it. She listened without flinching. And then she did something that nobody in authority had done for me in a very long time. She made a plan. She connected me with a nonprofit that provided housing stipends for teens in unstable situations. She helped me apply for free lunch. She flagged me for a scholarship program for first-generation college students. She said, "You are not going to fall through the cracks, not on my watch." I want to pause here for a moment, because I think about Mrs. Okafor all the time. I think about what my life would have looked like without her. And I want to say something to anyone watching who works with young people. You have no idea what one conversation can do. You have no idea how much it means when one adult in a position of authority looks at a struggling teenager and says, "I see you. I believe in you. Let's make a plan." You can change the entire trajectory of a life with that conversation. Mrs. Okafor changed mine. I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA. Not because it was easy, because failure was not an option I could afford. I got a partial academic scholarship to a state university. I took out loans for the rest. I moved into the dorms, and for the first time in years, I had a door that was mine, a lock that was mine, a space that nobody could remove me from. I sat on that dorm room bed the first night and I sobbed. Happy tears, relief tears. I'm still in tears. I majored in business administration, not because it was exciting, because it was practical, because I understood money differently than most of my classmates. I had lived on the wrong side of it. I knew what happened when you didn't have enough. I knew what it felt like to do math at a grocery store register before you got to the total. I knew what it meant to choose between a textbook and a week of groceries. That knowledge made me serious in a way that other students weren't yet. I took every class personally. Every accounting principle, every marketing framework, every negotiation tactic felt like armor. I took internships every semester. I worked for free when I had to. I introduced myself to every professor, every guest speaker, every alumni who came to campus events. I asked questions that other students were too proud to ask. I was never too proud to ask. Pride was a luxury I had already lost. What I had instead was hunger. Real, specific, directional hunger. By my junior year, I had a professor named Dr. Ellis who ran a consulting practicum. Real clients, real problems, real presentations. She pulled me aside after my first client presentation and said, "You read the room better than anyone I've seen in this program." I knew where that skill came from. I didn't tell her. But I knew. Years of being invisible had made me an extraordinary observer. When you are not the center of the room, you see everything happening at the edges. You see who holds the real power. You see who is performing and who is genuine. You see what people need versus what they say they need. That is not a business school skill. That is a survival skill. And in business, survival skills are worth more than any MBA. I graduated at 22 with honors and a job offer already in hand. Junior account manager at a regional marketing firm. Entry level, low salary, long hours. I said yes before they finished the sentence. I worked harder than anyone else on that floor. Not for validation, not to impress anyone, because I had been working this hard since I was 16, and this was the first time the work was building something that was mine. By 24, I was a senior account manager. By 26, I was running a team of 9 people. By 28, I had 3 major clients who followed me specifically. Not the firm, me. That's when I knew. That's when I understood what was possible. One of those clients, a woman named Gloria who ran her own supply chain consultancy, pulled me into her office one afternoon and said, "When are you going independent?" I said, "I've been thinking about it." She said, "Stop thinking. The clients are already there. You just need to sign the paperwork." Gloria became my mentor. She had built her own company from scratch after a divorce at 40. She had nothing when she started and everything when I met her. She taught me things about business that no classroom ever could. She taught me that confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward while terrified. She taught me that your reputation is your most valuable currency. Spend it carefully and it compounds. Spend it carelessly and no amount of skill repairs it. She taught me that the most powerful thing a woman in business can do is know her number. Know exactly what you are worth and never accept $1 less. I opened my consulting firm at 29. Just me, a laptop, a list of clients, a lot of coffee, and an absolute refusal to fail. The first year was terrifying. I will not pretend otherwise. There were months where I could not sleep, where I stared at spreadsheets at 2 in the morning, trying to make numbers work that did not want to work. There were clients who pushed boundaries, vendors who tried to take advantage, partners who overpromised and underdelivered. I handled every single one of them, not perfectly, but I handled them. Because I had been handling impossible situations since I was 16 years old. By year 2, I had a team of 4. By year 3, I had 12 employees. By year 4, I had moved into a proper office space downtown. Glass doors, my name on the wall, a conference room with a long table and 8 chairs. I stood in that conference room the morning we moved in, and I thought about that kitchen table. The one where Diane slid a piece of paper across to a 16-year-old girl. And I thought about how much distance there was between that table and this one, and how every single inch of that distance I had covered myself. Nobody carried me. Nobody handed me anything. Every inch was mine. It was a Wednesday morning in late October. I was in my office reviewing resumes for an office manager position. We needed someone experienced, someone who could handle vendor relationships, scheduling, administrative operations, client communications. I was going through the stack quickly. We had been short-staffed for 3 weeks, and I needed to fill the role fast. First resume. Qualified but not exceptional. Set aside. Second resume. Strong background but wrong industry experience. Set aside. Third resume. I picked it up. I read the name at the top, and I put my coffee down. Slowly, like I was handling something fragile. The name on the resume was Diane. My stepmother's name, her full name, her contact information, her work history, right there in my hands. I sat very still for a moment. The office was quiet. My assistant was in the hallway. The sun was coming through the windows, and I was holding a piece of paper that had traveled 12 years to land in my hands. I want to be completely honest about what I felt at that moment, because it was not simple. It was not clean. It was not one emotion. First, there was shock, real, physical shock. My hands felt strange. Then there was anger, old, deep, complicated anger. The kind that does not care how much therapy you have done. The kind that is attached to a rainy November night and a kitchen table and a father looking at the floor. Then there was something else. Curiosity. How had she ended up here? What has happened in 12 years? Why was she applying for a mid-level office position? What has changed? And underneath all of it, something I did not expect. Power. Not the ugly kind, not the vengeful kind, just the quiet, clear recognition that the person who had once controlled my fate was now holding her breath, waiting for mine. I set the resume down. I walked to my window. I looked out at the street below. And then I did something that surprised even me. I told my assistant to schedule the interview. She did not know it was my company. My firm operates under my initials and my professional name, which is different from my legal name. She had no reason to connect the dots. She applied through a job board. She interviewed over the phone with my assistant first. She passed that screening. And then she walked into my conference room. I was already seated when she came in. I watched the door open. I watched her step inside. She was older, of course. The confident energy I remembered had quieted into something more careful. She was dressed professionally. She looked prepared. She was smiling at my assistant who had walked her in. And then she turned to face me. The smile froze. I watched it happen in real time. Confusion, recognition, the color leaving her face. She stopped walking. She stood in the middle of my conference room, very still, trying to decide what to do with her expression. I said, "Hi, Diane, please, sit down." My voice was calm, professionally warm, the exact tone I use in every client meeting. She sat. She put her folder on the table in front of her. Her hands were steady, but I could see she was working very hard to keep them that way. I opened the interview the way I open every interview. "Tell me about your most recent role." She answered, professionally, clearly. She was qualified. Her experience was genuine. I asked her about her strengths. She answered. I asked her how she handled conflict in the workplace. She answered. I asked her where she saw herself in 3 years. She answered. And through every single question, she maintained eye contact. She did not collapse. She did not over-explain. She did not bring up the past. I respected that. At the end, I closed my notepad. I said, "Thank you for coming in. We'll be in touch within the week." She nodded. She began gathering her folder. And then she stopped. She looked at me for a long moment, and she said, "I know I don't have the right to ask you anything." I waited. She said, "But I want you to know that I am sorry for what I did, for what I allowed to happen. I was wrong. You were a child and I was wrong." 12 words. I had spent years imagining what I would say if this moment ever came. I had imagined sharp responses. I had imagined cold silence. I had imagined walking out. Instead, I said, "Thank you for saying that," because I meant it. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first honest thing she had ever said directly to me. And honesty deserves acknowledgement, even when it arrives 12 years late. She stood up. I walked her to the elevator. When the doors closed, I leaned against the hallway wall, and I exhaled in a way I did not know I had been holding. I did not make the decision that day. I did not make it that week. I called Gloria. I told her the whole story, from the beginning, from the kitchen table to the conference room. She listened without interrupting once. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want?" Not what you should do, not what would feel good, What do you want? I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the girl on Kayla's couch. I thought about the laundromat room with the window that looked out on an alley. I thought about homework on milk crates and peanut butter sandwiches and crying in bathroom stalls. I thought about my dad watching television while I walked out the door. I thought about who I was now. I thought about the woman I had built myself into. And Gloria said the thing that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "What you decide next will say nothing about her. It will say everything about who you've become." I let that sit. For 2 weeks I let it sit. And here is what I concluded. Revenge would mean she still had power over me. Revenge would mean I made a business decision based on a rainy November night. Revenge would mean I was still that 16-year-old in the driveway. I was not that girl anymore. I was someone she did not plan for, someone she did not see coming, and the most powerful thing I could do was make this decision from the woman I had become, not from the wound. I hired her. She has worked for me for 14 months. She is professional. She is organized. She is reliable. She handles vendor relationships cleanly. She manages scheduling without drama. She communicates clearly. She is good at her job. We do not have lunch together. We do not have personal conversations. We are not rebuilding a relationship. We are not a family. We are an employer and an employee, and we are both clear on that. But I will tell you something I have never told anyone. Sometimes, when I am leading a full team meeting, I catch her watching me. Not with resentment, not with jealousy, with something I can only describe as reckoning. Like a person doing the math of every choice they ever made. And I do not gloat. I do not need to. Math does it for me. I think about that girl a lot. The one in the driveway, soaking wet, $43, one bag. I think about what she believed in that moment. She believed this was the end. She believed she had been destroyed. She believed that being pushed out meant she did not belong anywhere. She was wrong. Being pushed out was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the only version of the story that was entirely hers. Because here is what I have learned about being pushed to the edge. The edge is where you find out what you are made of. Not in the safe middle, not in the comfortable house with the warm table and the family that chose you without conditions. At the edge, alone, afraid. $43. That is where I found out I was someone who could survive. And then I found out I was someone who could build. And then I found out I was someone who could lead. And then I found out I was someone that the woman who called me too much would one day work for. Not because I wished for it, not because I planned it, because that is what happens when you refuse to stay small. If you made it this far, I want to talk to you directly, not to an audience, to you. The one who is watching this at midnight because something in the title grabbed something in your chest. Maybe someone pushed you out too. Maybe someone told you that you were too much, too loud, too difficult, too complicated, too broken to include. Maybe someone handed you a list of options and none of them included staying. Maybe someone stood in a doorway and chose the floor over your eyes. I see you. And I need you to hear this. The people who push you out are almost never pushing you toward nothing. They are pushing you toward yourself, toward the version of you that has no choice but to get clear, get strong, get serious, and get going. You do not need their table. Build your own. I was 16 years old with $43 and one bag in the rain. Today I run a company. I sign the paychecks. I hold the keys. I built the table. And the woman who handed me a list of places to go because I was too much to keep, she hands me her timesheet every Friday. Not because I planned it that way, because that is what happens when you decide, in a rainy driveway, in the dark, alone and afraid, that this is the last time anyone does this to you. That decision changes everything. Not immediately, not easily, not without cost, but completely. You are not too much. You never were. You were just too much for the wrong people. And the right life? It was always waiting on the other side of that door.